Last two chapters, we get to talk about labor law and then collective bargaining or working with unions, labor union types of law. So let's get started here for chapter 21. And here we go. Labor law, an introduction, right? Prohibits unfair labor practices. We'll talk about some of those. Hopefully promotes good faith and collective bargaining, which gets into the labor union thing. So we'll touch on that here, but the next chapter is devoted to that. And then addresses relationship between employers and unions. Again, we just kind of touch on that. Here we get into more labor laws that are outside of maybe the union sphere of things. So we want to identify some major employment laws. There are some, definitely. Okay. We'll talk about, the employment at will, and that's really important in Montana, and I'll explain that when we get to it, because Montana is a bit unique. And talk about privacy and documentation, definitely. So in 1938 was when the Fair Labor Standards Act was passed, towards the end of the Depression, right? It did establish a minimum hourly wage. I was going to look this up because I believe Montana, we went $8.15, but I think in January of 2018 we go up to $8.25. I believe Montana's minimum wage will go up to $8.25 at the start of this next year. Montana's minimum wage is indexed for inflation, and so that's why it changes a little bit each year. And got to try to keep this up to date. It also sets the maximum number of hours, and that's been 40 hours for quite some time. Okay, and beyond that, employees must be paid at time and a half, and that's 40 hours per week. So it doesn't have anything to do with the number of hours in a day. Now, employment agreements can change that. You may work for a place that pays time and a half for anything over 8 hours. That, there's nothing wrong with doing that. Okay, but the law says it's just over 40 hours. It talks about time off, and the United States is unique. Okay, there is nothing in U.S. law that establishes paid time off for anything. Okay, nothing in U.S. law that requires paid time off for anything. This was maybe superseded by contract, again, meaning the contract can be better than this for the employees. Simply can't be worse. Okay, you can't have a contract that says we're going to work you 60 hours a week and not pay you time and a half. And the Fair Labor Standards Act, I believe, set employment requirements for minors and banned workers, I think at the age of 14, unless they're working on the farm, helping the mom and dad, those types of things. New in 2010, though, break time for nursing mothers to allow them to accommodate the needs that they might have or that their children might have, I guess. So Kathy is a secretary making an hourly wage. She works 5 days a week from 8 until 4:30 with an unpaid hour for lunch. One Monday, her boss asks her to stay an extra 2 hours to complete a project. Is she entitled to overtime pay? Well, now you got to do a little math. See, 8 until noon is 4 hours, and then an hour for lunch, and then so 1 to 4:30, so that's 3.5. So she's working 7.5 hours a day, 5 days a week, which is 37.5 hours, plus 2 takes her to 39.5. So the answer is no, actually. She wouldn't be. This question, if a plant is facing closing and layoffs, the employer must provide notice to employees under the, and we'll flip to that on the next page, but it's under the WARN Act, Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification. Yeah, hey, I got it right. They have to give notice of plant closings and any mass layoffs. I think it's any company that has more than 100 employees, that are more than half-time, to employees or to the union boss, the head of the union, if that's possible, 60 days prior when possible. So it makes some accommodations probably for businesses that are, get stuck by unforeseen circumstances. Maybe product couldn't get there because of an act of God or something. Who knows? So it does make some accommodations for that, but for the most part, they do have to give those kinds of notices. The Family Medical and Medical Leave Act for eligible employees, for employers that are covered, which has to be, and my recollection is that it's 75 employees. And as you might understand, a really small business, giving 12 weeks of unpaid, this is unpaid leave, could create a real hardship, for that particular business. And so really small businesses don't necessarily have to abide by this. They certainly can, and I think a lot of them would make every effort to do that. But bigger businesses are required to. It's also important to know, like if you're an HR director, you can require that your employee take any paid vacation that they've accrued as a part of the 12 weeks. Okay, you got to make sure you do the process correct, but you can make sure that they do that. What happened, I think, when they first passed the law is that people would, take their 12 weeks of unpaid vacation, and then literally you could call up and say, oh, guess what, I'm going to start my paid vacation tomorrow. And so they might extend that 12 weeks to, 14 weeks or 15 weeks. And that wasn't the intent of the law, and so they did change that. So, available to men and women. Originally, I think it was just for women and giving birth, but birth and care of a newborn child, adoption or foster care, placement, care of others, family member, spouse, child, parents. That can be extended, I think, to other family members if you show that you're the person most responsible for example, maybe a grandparent or something, or a grandchild. If an employee has a serious health condition themselves, or family members with qualifying exigency arising out of being called to active duty in the military. So, this is the one I couldn't remember a couple chapters ago, but the Uniformed Services Employment and Reemployment Rights Act protects those who hold civilian jobs who get called up, right? If they're in the Guards and they get called up because of a national disaster of some such, they have to notify the employer, of course. The period of service can't exceed 5 years. Got to be honorable, on and on and on. There was an interesting case. There was a fellow. This was several years ago, and I think it was the Iraq War, the Bush II, when we went over to Iraq, and he was a teacher and a coach, and this was over like in Fairfield or in that area, Conrad Choteau, something like that, and he got called up, and he went to serve, and that was fine, and he served, and he came back, and they had no problems giving him his job, his normal teaching job. But, somebody else had taken over the team, the sport, whatever sport he was coaching, and apparently done okay, and so they were reluctant to give him back that, and they had a little battle over that, and I don't remember the outcome. It's been long enough ago that I don't remember what the outcome of the case was, but it was one that tested this particular law. Returning employer must be restored to same or equivalent job with full benefits that they'd had otherwise. So, OSHA, we talked a decent amount about OSHA. Concerned with hazardous conditions, of course, our employers have to provide a safe working environment. They have a duty to do that. Rights of inspection for those that are covered under OSHA. That's we never had an OSHA inspection at the bank, and I suppose they could, but to my knowledge, they don't typically inspect those places, office, those types of things. It's more construction, industry, manufacturing, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, we'll pause there, and we'll come back and talk about pension plans and health care.